All right, so welcome to the Career Changer Guide to Software Orgs, brought to you by Learning Outcomes. My name is Brian Childs, one of the founding members of Learning Outcomes, which is basically, think of it as the knowledge base for customer education. If you want to find me on LinkedIn, you can just search for my name. You'll see me up in there amongst all the different Brian Childs on LinkedIn, and you can also just look for Brian Pilot. So this is the Career Changer Guide to Software Orgs, right? Many of you are in public education, higher education, learning and development, are interested in getting into software organizations. So I just want to let you know before we get started that I am a career changer. I've gone through this process. I used to be a commercial pilot. I worked on defense contracts, and then I got into tech software companies and really got into the education and learning strategy stuff. So I've made this transition. It was certainly challenging. And I know for those of you that are trying to get out of a current role and go into a new role, even if it is in education, it can be a little daunting. So my goal here, if we say, what is the goal of this webinar for you, is to help answer this question. So how do I transition into tech? and here's what we're going to do to answer that. And again, there is a second part to this webinar that you can join as well, which is going to go deeper into specifics on software org teams and things like that. But here's what we're going to have for the agenda today. We're going to talk about what is customer education, so that you know what customer education actually does. For those of you that are education professionals, maybe you're not really clear on what software companies do with education. I'll give you a little bit of like why I think it's a good time to be in customer education as someone who's made the transition and certainly enjoy it. And I do like teaching people, but there's more to it than that. We're going to go and talk about how software organizations organize this work of customer education, what skills are needed. And then as a hiring manager, I'll tell you a little bit about what makes a resume stand out. And then we have a bunch of Q&A. So if you're able to, you can always ask questions within the chat window as we go along. Okay, let's start with topic number one, which is what is customer education? So again, we're going to start very high level. Maybe some folks know this stuff, but again, not everybody on the call necessarily will. So it's good to start everybody at the same level. Right. So what is customer education? I actually just took a screenshot from a podcast I really like, which is called CE Lab, Customer Education Lab. So if you want to just Google CE Lab podcast, Adam and Dave run this. This is really great. They also publish a bunch of articles, not the Game of Thrones ad in the bottom left, but the what is customer education and why does it matter? Here's a great example of it. It describes it very succinctly. And I just pulled this out from the very top. So what is customer education? Customer education is the discipline of teaching customers how to use and find value for products, etc. So that's great, right? But let's use this as a real example. Let's actually take a look at a real example here. So I'm going to use an example of something that I think many of us are probably familiar with is Facebook, but you might be familiar with that Facebook has a lot of ads, right? So let's frame this concept of what customer education is within a real world experience. All right, so if you haven't made Facebook ads, I'll tell you right now, it's a little confusing. It's not the super easiest thing to just pop into and make, right? To go in and be like, I want to go make a Facebook ad. So imagine that we are wanting to make a Facebook ad and we get to an interface like this, okay? And there's stuff like spent last 7 days, campaign name, delivery results, cost, amount, ends. There's so many terms and things all over this interface that I don't really understand, right? So I'm just a human being. I'm trying to go in and make a Facebook ad. Well, here's what Facebook wants me to do, okay? Facebook wants me to go in. I'm like, hey, I want to make a Facebook ad. I'm going to go and click on the link and go to Facebook ads and navigate to the site. I'm going to create an account. I'm going to then create an ad and I'm going to publish that ad. And what happens when I publish that ad? Well, it means that I start paying Facebook to use their advertising platform, right? This is their desired path for me. But here's the thing is that, a lot of people do this where they're like, oh, I really want to do that Facebook ad thing. Go to the site. I'm going to create an account. What are all these words and how does this work? And I'm lost. And where do I click? And I click around. And I never actually create an ad. I never publish an ad. Facebook never gets paid, right? So this is a very good example of the role that customer education plays. Okay, so I'm kind of illustrating here just an example of how a software company might use education. So here's the use case. I have a desired path. The actual path is different, and the cash register sound never goes because I don't actually buy anything. So you can imagine this is super common within software companies. Think of all the times that you've like started a free trial, never paid for anything, or like clicked on a link and created an account and been like, nah, I'm not interested, and then bounced out of there, right? That happens all over the place. And here this is another illustration of this to say that, like, hypothetically, let's say that there's 5,000 people that want to try Facebook ads, that go to the site, that create an account, but only 1,000 of them actually ever figure out how to create that ad. And of those, only 500 ever put publish, right? So if you're Facebook, you're looking at this and saying, all of those people that didn't create an ad and didn't publish that ad are potentially lost revenue, right? They came to my site, they were interested in going to buy something, but then they didn't actually complete the action that generates any kind of value for me, right? We would call this, in software, we call this churn. This is a churn problem, okay? So churn is when people start using software and then stop using it. So they're like, I did a free trial and then I stopped, or I signed up to use it and I put in my credit card, but before I ever got charged for my first month, I exited. Huge problem within software. Okay. Now there's two typical ways that software companies solve this. One is what we'd call like reactive activities. Okay. It means like, I'm going to go on YouTube and be like, WTF, Facebook, create account. Like, why? Right. So that's one option. And then the other option you're familiar with is you create a support ticket. Like, how many people love interacting with these little chat windows? Like, isn't that just the best experience ever, is going in and being like, I literally don't know how to use your product. Now, like, hello, admin, please help, right? These are reactive things. It means I've already encountered the problem and now I'm trying to resolve it some way by going and using their support ticketing system. So these are reactive. Now let's talk about things that people like us can do, right? These are proactive solutions. So a proactive solution is something where they have like an onboarding experience. Maybe I get on the phone with somebody when I sign up for an account and they help me out and be like, hey, Brian, let's do step 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to show you your way through this. Another thing that exists is customer training, also called customer education, where there's courses and videos and a bunch of different modalities to help me as a user of this software learn how to use it before I encounter those problems, right? So the idea being that customer education or customer training, what it's doing is it's trying to intervene earlier on in a user's experience with the expectation that we're not going to have all of that churn that takes place later on. And so therefore the value of the product goes up, right? Or I should say the revenue that's generated by that product goes up. So if we're trying to answer this question, what is customer education, right? Like, what do software companies do with education? They use targeted training solutions to impact high value business objectives. And some examples of those are like, try to deflect support tickets. So I don't want to have so many support tickets. So I don't need to pay so many people to support my customers, or I want to improve the onboarding experience, right? Anybody have any questions about this? How many people, if you're in the chat, how many people are like, yeah, no, I got it. How many people are sort of like, oh, this is a new concept to me. I didn't realize that software companies used education in this way and that they're literally using like instructional design. Manuel's got it. Cool. Okay. That's great. Okay, everybody's got it. Perfect. Everybody's following along. Feel free to use that that chat window if you have any questions as we go along. I'm not a robot, I promise. Okay, so let's move on. So now that we have a decent sense of like what customer education is, or what software companies do with this, let me give you my little like pitch as to why it's a good time to be in customer education. So why transition to customer education? If you are a public educator or a higher educator, or if you're in learning and development and you're sort of like, I want to try something else, well, guess what? Now's a pretty good time. And I don't work for like, big ed or whatever. Like, this is just me talking as a person who's made a career transition, who likes teaching, and has found that this is a very good place to be. So this comes from the Thought Industries annual report on the industry. And you can see here, like a couple of little data points in the last 5 years, how's blah, 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 right? In customer education, great. look at 2020 and 2021, right? Significant increases in the amount of education being provided by software companies. So I started doing this maybe in software tech for real, like maybe like 5, 6, 7 years ago ish. I've been building education programs for quite a while in aviation prior to that, but like I'm right in this wave. I tell you what, things are changing and they're happening quite a bit. You can also see here, right? This is 2021, so we're kind of looking back at COVID. It's like, how much has your investment increased? Well, quite a bit. Like most places are investing quite a bit in their education. All right, so what does that translate into for us as practitioners of education services, right? It means that like there's gold in them our hills, right? So this is very in line with what a senior instructional designer would make working for a software company. I would say that like you could start out with some background in instructional design, you know, and it's like you could get everything from like fresh out of college specialist in the like 40 to 60 range to like to, you know, like the 60 to 80 range for like people that have a couple of years of experience. And if you're actually helping build programs and doing senior instructional design work, it gets into like the 80 to 100 to 120 and just goes from there. So it's a good time to be in this. But here's the thing. There is a catch. And knowing that many of you come from public education, higher education, and learning development, there is a catch. Oh, Emanuela asked, does senior apply that you have experience with a software company or just experience overall? Great question. We'll talk about that in a little bit when it comes to like relevant experience. And in fact, I'll kind of touch on it here in the, there's a catch. So here's one of the challenges, right? Is we get used to writing about our experiences in the industry that we work in. And so it comes across being a story. If you're a teacher, you write a teacher resume. And I'll tell you, I'm obviously not Jeffrey Jones. I just like took this off of online, but like this is what my resume used to look like when I was a pilot. Literally stopped being a pilot, went and wanted to work for software companies, and I started sending people this resume. And I'm like, here's my total flight hours, and here's all my certificates. And it's like, people don't know what to do with that. So much of the challenge of making these transitions is about translating your experience into the language of the place that you're going to, right? Like if I had this resume, I'd be like, yo, I have 3,000 hours of flight time. I'm a captain. And I'm like, these are all really important leadership experiences. And people in interviews would literally be like, have you ever done any leadership? And I'm like, can you not read my resume? And I'm sure for those of you who are coming from education backgrounds, I bet you, I'm sure you feel that, right? When you're like, it's on my resume, it says that I can do that, but for some reason it's not translating over. And here's another reality is that when I'm doing hiring, I would say that like somewhere around 50%-ish and more of the applicants that I get are people who come from public education and higher ed. Here's the thing though, is that many of them don't ever get shortlisted, right? Why? Well, because when reading their resumes, it doesn't look like they have relevant experience. And this is things that are happening, like HR is doing this. HR is kicking these things out because they're like, this person doesn't have this experience we're looking for. There's concerns that the person cannot hit the ground running in tech. They're not going to know really like how to navigate around a software company. And that also goes with the processes, or they might be missing what appear to be key skills. Now, here's the thing that I think we all recognize is that the last year and a half has really changed everything, right? It's like the experience of public education, the experience of teachers in large part has started to look a lot similar to what the customer education professional is working on as well, okay? And so we can kind of flip the script, right? We can say, look, well, what if you could translate your experience into software? What if you could develop a portfolio that shows that you understand how to use the tools? What if you could, you know, learn how companies work, and if you could basically smatter out some high value skills. And this is totally possible. All right, this is a real thing that people can do. And so more than anything, I'm just trying to like encourage you. I do want to say, I want to take this opportunity right now to say that, like, look, as I mentioned in the intro before we started recording, it's like we have another webinar that's coming up. So when it comes to some of these things around learn how tech companies work, and sort of understand where things fit, how to develop a portfolio. There's other opportunities for us to dig into this. So if you're interested in going deeper on some of these topics, we have another webinar that's on July 22nd. And then next month in August, I'm actually putting on a boot camp where we're going to go much deeper. And I'll talk about that later when we get to the Q&A section. Okay, so any questions so far? I see we have a couple questions in here. Manuel asked that question about senior. So I think that senior can be how you position it, right? If you have several years of experience working in instructional design, or the kinds of things that if you are a public educator that you were doing during COVID, if you can translate those things over and use the right language, I think you can at least squeak out, a couple, a year or two worth of highly relevant experience. And then potentially you could say like, look, I also have several years worth of education too. Kimberly asked, do you need an instructional design background to get a job in the field? You can go look at my LinkedIn and you're not going to see instructional design within that. Now, granted, I've done a lot of education. It certainly helps. It is a nice buzzword to have, but I think that you can fill a lot of this in with certifications, to be honest. It's like what I look for, and I'll just kind of like jump into this. What I look for is I look for people that know how to communicate and can problem solve, that have some good like program development skills, things like that. It's like the ID part is really important for some jobs. I'd say that it makes a person stand out if they have an ID background, but depending upon the organization, it's not a deal breaker. America asked what the typical job titles in customer education. We'll talk about that in a bit. And okay, so we'll get into some of the job titles in just a moment. So let's talk now. So we've kind of given you my like, here's what customer education is. Here's sort of what's going on in that landscape right now for these jobs. And now let's dive into a little bit about like, where does this fit within a software org? So some of this might go over your head. That's fine. Don't worry about it. This is one way of looking at a software organization. And again, if you come to one of the follow-up webinar, we'll talk more about this in detail, like these different roles and who some of these people are, like what does a product team do? How do product and engineering work together? Like how do sales and marketing work together? Like what are all these different job titles? Why is customer education typically underneath the success organization? If you're not familiar with success and engineering and product and stuff, that's cool. But I'll tell you what, when we go over it in the other webinar and we go over it in that boot camp, it really helps to be able to navigate around this organization, right? Because as you know, building content and building educational resources is a collaborative effort. You need to go to somebody to get you to help understand how to talk about a specific subject, right? So understanding how these organizations work is super valuable. But let's take a different look at this from the standpoint of this thing that I'm calling the customer lifecycle. You'll also hear salespeople talk about this as the bow tie. Okay, so this is, if you ever want to riff on stuff with your sales friends, you can be like, yo, I learned about the bow tie. So you can see that time on this moves from left to right. Okay, so similar to what I talked about before, there's that triangle and, kind of showed like how people might use a particular software solution. Well, this is a way that people kind of evaluate the journey that a buyer takes. We go through this every single time. Think of any software you've ever used, any application you've ever used. Well, what happens? I'm going to go to the website, or I'm going to go to, Google Play. I'm going to do a free trial, or I'm going to click on the button to download. I'm then going to go through a process between when I purchase, which might even just, if it's free, that might just mean that I start using it. And when I actually like start using it in my life. And I know that maybe that's not, we'll go into this in just a second, but it's like, there's this point that happens where I'm done being new with it. And I'm more like adept at it. Then there's a process much after that where I decide to continue using it. Okay. And then at some point in time, oftentimes with software that is purchased, you decide to renew. So that might be like every single month, I'm going to keep paying them, right? Or every single year, if it's like business software, I might keep paying them. So that's the renewal cycle. Okay, so this is the bow tie. We consider this to be like what people do when they are starting to use software. And I promise this will make sense when it comes to software organizations. This isn't just some crazy detour. No, I don't know how to tie a bow tie, for what it's worth. So let's talk about a couple terms in here, okay? Because it's helpful to think about like where this customer education function exists within this process. first thing is this concept I mentioned about adoption here. Okay. So, because remember that one of the things that customer education does is it tries to make it easier for you to onboard. So, what does it mean? What would our goal as customer education professionals in a software organization do? We would be coming up with training to make it so that it's easier for that person to feel comfortable using the software, where they feel like, I got it. Okay. The adoption tends to have the moment when that happens. We call this the wow moment. We call it like, this is the moment when I've internalized the use of this. Imagine getting like some banking app or something like that, and you're just like, where is everything? And I don't know where anything is. And then like 3 months later, you're like, you know where all the buttons are and you can click on anything, right? Adoption is the point at which you make that transition from being like, I don't know where anything is, to being like, oh, I know exactly where to go to find that thing. So this is when a customer has discovered the value of the software and begins using it as part of their day-to-day processes. This is a real thing, and it's fun to watch in your own use cases, like when this happens with different software solutions or tools, whatever you want to use. If you ever drive a tractor, I'll tell you what, there's an adoption point when you're like, I actually know how to make this thing work. The other word I want to mention here is retention. Okay. And hopefully you're writing some of these words down, or you can kind of like, keep track of these, because these are words that if you are going into a interview, these are words that you want to be able to say. You want to be like, yep, I worked on a project where I was really helping people adopt this kind of solution or adopt this concept. There's another thing called retention, which is specific to people buying software, right? Which is, if I'm selling you software and it's like, you got to pay every month for that thing, right? Like imagine Netflix, right? Netflix wants to retain you, or HBO wants to retain you. Okay. So every month that they get me to pay for HBO Max is another retention activity, right? So this is they want to improve the length of time that a customer is paying for HBO Max or for Netflix. Okay. Now, if I stop using Netflix, what happens? Remember that word before? Churn. So churn is the opposite of retention. Those are basically saying the same thing. So if you ever hear those words like, hey, we have a churn problem, you're going to ask people and you'll say like, yeah, what are you doing with your customer education program? They're going to say, oh, we're trying to fight churn. They might also say, oh, we're trying to improve retention. Exact same concept, right? These are two words that mean the same thing. They're just opposite sides of the same coin. One means I want to extend the length of time that somebody's with us. The other means that like people are leaving, and so it's reducing the amount of time that they're spending with us. Okay, so a little bit of terminology there as it relates to the old bow tie. Okay, so let's now align our organization to this bow tie. I swear we're getting somewhere, I promise. So now I've laid the different teams that are typically involved in these activities. When you think about what marketing does, okay, what marketing does is they're responsible for that visit website activity, right? Everything that ever happens with you being targeted with an ad or being sent a thing in the mail that says you should try something out, that's all marketing. And all marketing wants you to do is either pick up the phone or visit a website, right? That's their job. At some point, with many different products, there's a sales team as well. What does that sales team do? It takes all those people that marketing got to come to the website, picks up the phone, calls them and says, hey, let me tell you all the great reasons why you should buy this thing. Okay, that's sales' job, and all they want to do is get you to that purchase line. That's their job. Then there is a team that is called implementation. Okay, implementation is that onboarding person. So if you ever have bought software or started using software and they're like, hey, join an onboarding call, or like, oh, watch this webinar for this person that describes all these things, those are all implementation people. And the reason I'm telling you all these different names is because when you go and take a job interview, you will probably talk to some of these people in that job interview. And it helps to be when they say, oh, I do implementation, to be like, okay, got it. You help people onboard, which means it's something that my education solution can help you with. After that, going in line is success. Anybody who's in success or the success team is involved in helping accounts stay accounts. That means that's the person that meets with you on a monthly basis, or that random phone call or email you get, every couple of months. We're like, hey, how are you doing with XYZ software? Everything going good? Or if you're working in a business, or maybe this works even in school. Sometimes you're working with like certain software solutions and they're hitting you up and being like, hey, how's things going? Anything I can help you with? Blah, blah, blah. That's the success team. Those are all about just keeping the retention and the renewal rates up. And they have account managers, things like that. And you'll also notice underneath that is support. So what does support do? Support is whenever you file a ticket or get on that little chat window or, you know, go to the knowledge base or an article, support's in charge of all that stuff. So success is there to get in conversations with you, help you understand, you know, why there's value in the thing and help you work through problems. Implementation is there to help you get onboarded, and support is basically there to handle any of the issues that you have. And then customer education sits in mostly in this area. So like when somebody is running a customer education program, more often than not, it is organized to hit and help these different teams. So you might talk with a marketing person, you might talk with a salesperson, but when you talk to an implementation success or support team member, or a title that is like, I'm an implementation specialist or an onboarding specialist or a success manager, an account manager, or support engineer or support manager, when you're talking to those people, those are the people you can deliver value to with your knowledge of education. They are going to be super stoked to talk to you and be like, tell us what you can do for us. Tell us your ideas, help us out. So these are your advocates. Little, you know, another thing that's worth pointing out here, and I realize that we're about half hour, so we got another, say, like 15 minutes or so of the presentation. I think this is going to be, we're getting into some of the stuff about like what skills do you need and things like that. But when you're defining the value, this also comes from that Thought Industries document. What are the biggest benefits? So when you survey people, this is just backing up what I said previously, which is, what is it that people are getting from these programs? This is what they're getting. This is what the companies say they get from it. Number one, improve customer onboarding and retraining. Well, now you know what that means, right? It's like, oh, that's the number one thing that people are doing. Maybe if you saw this before, you'd be like, I don't know what customer onboarding really means. What it means helping people understand how to use the product so they'll adopt it. Increase product usage. Well, what is that, right? That means that's in that retention phase. That's that like, hey, like keep using this more and you should consume more, things like that. Faster time to value. Guess what? That's an onboarding thing, etc. So you can kind of see that. So I just wanted to back this up and say, this isn't just me making it up. There's actually data that backs this up. This is how people are using it. So one of the most common, again, this is just a restatement of the last slide, which is one of the most common business goals, improve rates of adoption and retention for new customers. So why do I want to bring this up? Why am I talking about this so much? Is because remember, the problem is about framing your experience. Think about adoption and retention of either software solutions or concepts, anything like that. Anytime you can tell me a story about how you helped someone figure out how to use something and the process by which you help them do that and they're using it more, and like, you tell me how to use a calculator and I put the calculator down, that ain't a successful story. But if you show me that you can teach me how to use a calculator and I can like actually go and use it and everybody's using it afterward, that's adoption. That's a success story about adoption. So here's some trivia. Anybody want to type this into the chat window? What teams would you likely work with most? Right? Just using this, what are some of the teams? What are some of the team names? Like if you were going to reach out to companies and ask them, or different titles that you look at, what are some of the different names of job titles that you'd look at? What are some of those like different teams where you're going to do the most? Manuel says success, customer success team. Kevin, implementation success and support. Yes, perfect. You guys got it. All right. So hopefully that helps. So when you're out there on LinkedIn and you're trying to like find people to sink the harpoon into to go and talk to, or you see postings, or you look for teams that you might want to enter a software company with, but actually know that you want to get into customer education, these are the teams where the customer education function normally grows out of. Okay. All right. So let's shift gears. I think there's a question back there. Just want to make sure. Jennifer asked, what are some of the most common software applications people in customer education use? Fantastic question. We're going to actually get to that, not directly in this one, but in the other next webinar in 2 weeks, we're going to talk about that in a lot more detail. Like we'll talk about team by team, what are the different software applications that are there. And if we have the Q&A a little bit, I can come back to this. Okay, so let's talk about skills. Okay, here's one of the things that is very, very common, right? Is like, all right, here's a learning management system. It's got a bunch of data. It's got like some UI, some user interface design. You know, when I was a pilot and I was trying to get into tech, here's what I thought. Don't I need to go to like code school to be in a software company? Like, right? Like, don't you need to know how to code stuff or whatever that means, developer stuff, internet, right? The answer is no, you don't. Now, engineers do. I mean, they need to code. That's their job. They code stuff. But as an educator, there's platforms that you use, there's software that you use, and you know this if you've used, Zoom or anything, right? It's like there's a solution, and what you're trying to do is you're trying to find the modality that actually meets the need for what you're trying to accomplish. So here's some of the things that get used, right? Or some of the things that you build. You build e-learning courses. I don't need to code to do e-learning courses. There's a learning management system that I just put videos into and write text. Knowledge base articles. What is that? I'm just writing articles. No different than if I was to publish a blog or just like, send an email in most cases. Certificate programs. Certificate programs tend to be a specialization. So if you don't have a background in certificate programs, you'd want to know how to run certificate programs, but you know what, guess what? A lot of people in education do things that have a certification aspect or something similar to that. And then there's a lot of training workshops, right? Instructor-led training, virtual instructor-led training, webinars. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure that teachers stand in front of a room and talk to people about how to educate them, right? And know how to tell a story to keep people's attention over a period of time, right? That's what workshops are. That's what webinars are. It's about organizing that. This is not a coding kind of thing. That said, okay, there are things you can do to stand out. And this is something that's coming from my perspective as someone who hires for these roles. Okay, I'm going to tell you like the kinds of things that I look for in resumes. Again, assuming that you've written a resume that really talks about, you have your job titles, right? Your job titles are what they are, but that puts everything in terms of like software. Okay. Assuming that I have a resume that I'm looking at that way and I can kind of see it and there's not a lot of erroneous sort of teacher speak that's within it, and it's written for a software type of job. Here's some of the things I look at to stand out. Okay. I really want to see a URL that I can click on that has some kind of portfolio, right? I really want to I want to be able to go somewhere and see coursework that you put together, right? I honestly don't know if that's very common in certain education aspects. I know for learning and development, a lot of that stuff tends to be like, behind the wall inside the company. But I really want to see a portfolio. Now, there's some fairly lightweight ways to do that. Okay, to create your own, using lightweight learning management systems or something to just create your own courses. Now, here's what I recommend. Don't create a course about child education. Don't create a course about teaching, like being a teacher. Pick a subject of like a hobby you have. Pick a subject of something that you've enjoyed learning or that you enjoy teaching about. And if possible, think about something that might have some tech aspect associated with it, right? But I mean, even if you give me a course that's you telling me how to fill up a car with gas, it'll at least show me that you can put together the constructs of what that is. I want to be able to click on it. I want to be able to look and see your work. Here's another one, and this was some advice that I think is really, really great, and I 100% agree with this, is develop a high-value skill. Now, that's pretty generic, right? Like, okay, great, high-value skill, great. Tell me you can mine Bitcoin or something. No, but like, let me tell you some specifics. If you're going to go out, I made them here. I'll just self-disclose it. Like when I was making a career change, here's what I did. I went and got an MBA. All right. MBA is a super expensive, educational program. I don't really know if it helped me get a job in tech, right? But there's some really much less expensive paths that you can take and things that look really good on a resume. I'm not saying you have to do these, but these are little like nuggets that you could throw on there if you're like, I'm going to spend the next month or 2 months over the summer trying to do this, okay? One of them is learning HTML and CSS. So what is HTML and CSS? When you're asking that, like, don't I need to learn to code? All HTML and CSS is it's just the front end design of a website, right? So go to Wikipedia and there's an image in the top right and there's some text on the page. Everything that's being displayed to you on the screen, I mean, literally what we're looking at right now is being controlled by HTML and CSS. This would be called like front end design work. This place, Epicodus, I literally went to this. If you click on those links, that link down there, if you click on those links, it's a free course in HTML and CSS. Okay, you can just go through all that stuff. It has exercises in there and everything. If you just look up free HTML courses, you will find these. And if you go to YouTube, you can find a lot of them. This is something that just helps. Why? Because if I'm building and trying to design something on the front end, and I know that I got a team member that understands rudiments of HTML and CSS, which is just front end design work, I'll be like, oh, that's cool. I need that. That helps me out, get my work done. So I check that out. It's a great learning experience. I'd say it's a great learning experience overall. SQL is another one. SQL is also not hard to do. It's just a thing that for whatever reason, a lot of people don't invest in. All SQL is it's your ability to go access databases. Okay. It means, and we use a lot of data in customer education. Remember, I'm trying to target business objectives. I'm trying to say, how many people of this huge cohort took this training and then did this activity in the application and then didn't churn after 3 months, right? That's a lot of data. And that means if I don't have somebody on my team that can run SQL queries, it means I got to go to somebody else in the organization. If I have a team member that knows how to do this, and it's not hard to do it, if I have a team member that can do this, I can be like, I would absolutely look at that resume and say, I like that. Like, I like it when people have a SQL, some experience with SQL queries. All it means is I got to go write a query into a database. It's actually something that's probably another like lifelong thing. This one costs more. I think these run the certification for a Salesforce admin is somewhere closer to, depending upon which ones you take. It could be an investment between like 5 and 10 grand or something. I'm not selling Salesforce admin here, but I am saying that like software companies like these people. You have Salesforce admin on your resume. This is a high value skill because most software companies use Salesforce, which is basically just like it's a software used to track prospects and sales. It's kind of a beast. A lot of companies do it wrong. And if they find out you have a Salesforce admin, you might just get a job for this. A year later, you could be like, you know what? I really want to go over and work in that customer education team. And this is a nice doorway in. I'm not saying this is the driveway to customer education, but it's like, this is a high value thing right now. Okay. Another thing is you could go find a customer success role at a startup, okay, or a software company. And why? If you go to a small software company, I'm talking like 150 or 100 to 150 people or less, they probably hire a lot of like customer success managers or onboarding specialists and things like that. These tend to be entry-level roles, right? So it's like the salaries might not be that as great starting out, but you can find some of them. But why go to a customer success role at a startup? Is because if it's that small, they might not have a customer education program. You could go in, take your education background, spend some time in that customer education team, and then say, hey, folks, check it out. Why don't we teach these people? And they're going to think you're like Steve Jobs. They're going to be like, wow, mind blown. You could build a program from scratch, and all of a sudden, no one's looking at your resume. You're looking at other people's resumes. I did this. This was a great path in. Last thing I'm going to mention is if you can really show me that you have great program planning chops, this is really helpful. And it shows up in the data as well. Okay, here's like a really interesting article that was written about the future of work, which is like high income earners. What really differentiates them is they know how to make work plans. Okay, so this is another one that I'd say, like, if you can find ways to tell me about how you built a program or how you do program planning and you've organized all of it and you have that in your background, super, super helpful. Okay, so that's, I know, so I realize, you know, we can go into Q&A now, and I realize that, like, we're going to talk more about org structure. I just want to remind you that starting, so 2 weeks from today, 3 o'clock, I got another one. You can go to the learning-outcomes.com, go in there. You can go up to the webinars and you'll see this guide to software orgs, part 2. In that one, we're going to talk more about, you know, like these different roles and the different technologies that they use, and just like down in the details of like, what does an onboarding specialist use? What does a support rep use, so that you can be familiar with that language and the terminology of what they do, right? And then, like I mentioned, we got this boot camp next month. The reason I really like the boot camp is we're going to go deep into processes, okay? And this is where it's like, if you want to go and build a program, or you want to step through the door and be like, I know 100% of what's going on with these programs, that's more like this, where we'll go just deep into the processes and process steps of how everything works. Cool. So that's what we got going on today. I think I barely made it into like 45 minutes, but I'm happy to stick around and do some Q&A. So thanks everybody. I hope this has been something that's been useful for you. I hope it's been kind of interesting to illuminate you. I really hope to see you in part 2 in 2 weeks. Yeah, and so I'm gonna just hang out here and I'll do some Q&A. Okay, so I'm gonna stop the recording right now, and then we'll just kind of do some Q&A here.